Welcome to Siesta Time Chez Nous. A correction or a clarification regarding Lewis Hamilton's reaction to Jackie Stewart. There seems to be some intellectual confusion brought on by some emotional hurt. What Jackie Stewart said was not disrespectful of Hamilton, nor was it a dismissal nor a criticism of Hamilton. What Jackie Stewart said is, I'm not ready to say that Lewis Hamilton is the greatest of all drivers because he has the most victories. And I'm glad to hear him say it, but whether I'm glad or not, we're talking about Jackie Stewart. And then when this man talks, we all ought to listen, not necessarily agree, but we have to respect what he says, because this is one of the men, one of the top guys in the sport. And if Jim Brown were talking, not that Jackie Stewart is necessarily Jim Brown, but if Jim Brown were talking about football, we'd all listen, wouldn't we? And Pele is pretty tough, but Stewart is not as tough as Pele when it comes to modern players. All Jackie Stewart was saying was that you can't compare drivers that easily. You can take a bunch of drivers and put them all in a very high list of the elite grade drivers, but you can't do what they try to do in tennis also. Just count up the number of majors a guy wins and say, oh, because Pete Sampras had 12, he was the greatest of all time, and automatically he was better than Rod Laver or Pancho Gonzalez or Don Budge or Bill Tilden. And then Federer, certainly, who belongs in the short list, won 20, and everyone said, well, he's the greatest ever. And so now, if Nadal or Djokovic surpass him, they somehow automatically become the greatest. It's a wonderful parlor game to talk about who the greatest in any sport is. But there's only been one greatest, as we say in America, and that's Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth was the greatest baseball player there's ever been. And we don't even say he was the greatest hitter, because you can make a case for Ted Williams. But we're talking about baseball players. It was Babe Ruth. Now, when it comes to driving, what Stewart was saying was that a long time ago, decades ago, drivers only drove 6 or 7 Grand Prix races because they were also driving other motorsports. They were participating in rallies. They were participating in Le Mans. They were participating in other classifications. Their whole year wasn't taken up with Formula One. That's the first thing. The second thing is, although I don't think Stewart touched on this, the physical danger involved made it a different sport. So Fangio driving around in a t-shirt and some goggles and bare hands sometimes was a little different from what we call, racing today. Not that we should go back. We shouldn't. Also, how many drivers are there that were so great but were killed before they ever reached 35, before they ever reached 30, before they ever reached 25? Today, we live in an age when a driver can last. But most of all, Stewart was talking about the quality of the car. And it bothers me too, and I think even Hamilton has admitted the same thing, that he said if he were 14 years old, he wouldn't necessarily watch the entire race. He would watch the beginning and the end. But because this Mercedes is so dominant, it's almost always Hamilton or Bottas. Bottas or Hamilton. Hamilton or Bottas. And the only driver who seems to shine is beyond that is Max Verstappen, who, makes a go of it. And Stewart is simply saying, I can't play that game where we just count up the number of victories, because so many of these victories are Mercedes victories. And we know that Hamilton is a great driver, but we don't know how great he is. And we won't know how great he is unless he switches cars with Max Verstappen.